In the Tower of Fangs, Krylancello Finrandi finds his master Childman knocked out while his foster sister Azali Kate Sith transforms into a monstrous dragon. The other sorcerers are alerted and they try to kill the dragon, but Krylancello stops them by using his defensive sorcery. Now a brief narration tells us how dragons dominated the Kisalhima continent and started to make sorcerers by mixing with humans. 5 years later, we see two dwarves, Dorten and Vulcan, running from Krylancello, who has now adopted the name Orphan. He confronts the dwarves as they owe him money, but they bump into a cop who is also after them. She tries to catch Dorten and Vulcan, but accidentally strikes a stranger with a dart, thus allowing the dwarves to escape, while Orphan heals the victim. Later, Orphan visits a pub where he hangs out with his friend Magic, who is obsessed with sorcery. Orphan offers to teach him some tricks, but Magic's father discourages him from doing so. They are interrupted by Dorten and Vulcan, who offer Orphan a chance to make a lot of money by duping the Everlasting family. Meanwhile, the Sorcerer Forte has a conversation with Latika, whom he refers to as Tish. They discuss Azali, who is called the former Chaos Witch, and then they are alerted of her presence. Some of the Forte sorcerers attack her but struggle to cause any damage. Now, Childman arrives after having woken up from his slumber, and Azali shares a glance with him before flying away. Now, the dwarves and Orphan meet Maribel Everlasting and her mother in an effort to scam them into marrying Orphan. However, their charade doesn't work and they are left alone in the room. Then they meet Cleome Everlasting, who has figured out their intentions and reveals that her family is calling the cops on them. It leads to a hilarious exchange between the dwarves and Orphan, after which Cleome talks about a sorcerer she had met earlier. Suddenly, Azali attacks the town and the castle, so Cleome rushes with Orphan to check in on her family. They find Azali, and Orphan tries his best to make her recognize him, but she simply attacks him and takes away the sword of Beldanders. The other sorcerers arrive and try to strike her, but Orphan stops them from doing so after taking down some of their disciples. However, this doesn't help his case as Azali attacks him once again, so he has to defend himself. Despite his best efforts, she flies away with the sword. In a flashback, we are taken to the Tower of Fangs where we meet Hartia, Korgan, and Comicron, who are all part of Childman's sorcery class along with Forte, Tish, Azali, and Orphan. They are labeled as troublemakers due to Azali's antics, and we see it in action when she fools around with her friends. We also learn that Comicron likes to build androids, but they are mostly useless, so he's reprimanded for it. Back to the present day, Dorten and Vulcan wake up Orphan, after which he reveals his past and his relationship with Azali, whom he cares for the most. After disclosing that his only mission right now is to return Azali to her human form, he is visited by Hartia, who takes him out of his cell and leads him to Childman. As Orphan argues with his sensei, a flashback shows us how he had abandoned the tower after getting into an argument over Azali's fake funeral. We learn that Orphan is actually an elite black sorcerer, as Childman explains the nature of the experiment with the sword of Beldanders that turned Azali into a dragon. She is also revealed to possess white sorcery powers, so Childman asks Orphan to help him kill Azali. The sword's tracker goes off, so the team gets ready to leave and Orphan joins them, as he doesn't have much of a choice. He visits Cleome to fix some of the damages of her property, and then she shows him a protective ring that had actually belonged to Azali. He realizes that Forte had brought it to her, as the ring is capable of making any weapon ineffective. They have a brief discussion, after which Orphan joins Childman and is reunited with his ex-classmates as they set out on their quest. The group makes its way through the forest and Orphan argues with Childman, after he says that he's ready to sacrifice the others in order to stop Azali. Meanwhile, Cleome convinces Dorten and Vulcan to come along and help Orphan, but they run into a bear monster and are chased. As the search continues, Orphan calls out Azali's name, and she eventually responds by lighting the forest on fire. He rushes to the spot, but she attacks him with all her might and starts to break through his shield. Luckily, Childman and the others arrive and begin their encounter. However, Azali ends up killing some sorcerers, including Comicron. Orphan figures he has to steal the sword of Beldanders to stop the battle, so he escapes with it. However, Hardia stops him and tries to convince him to help the sorcerers kill Azalee. However, Orphan remains adamant on curing her, so Hardia attacks him with his shadow powers. Orphan breaks free quite easily, and then Cleom hilariously knocks out Hardia from behind. Orphan rescues her and the dwarves from the bear monster and goes back to Azalee. He is shocked to see that she has killed everyone except Childman, who is struggling to hold her off. Orphan decides to join in and save him, but Childman stabs him so that he can't interfere with his plans anymore. He proceeds to kill Azalee, after which he heals Orphan, who is heartbroken to see his sister die. He rushes to the body, but is shocked to learn some new information via a telepathic conversation with the dragon. The next day, Orphan confronts Childman and exposes him to be Azalee in disguise. She finally ends her facade and reveals that she had switched consciousness with Childman when they exchanged glances. Then she explains how she had used the Sword of Baltanders incorrectly 5 years ago, but will now exploit it to her advantage. Orphan has an intense debate with her, after which she attacks him with the sword, but it is ineffective as Orphan has swallowed her protective ring. Then he reveals that Childman had allowed her to switch with him because he wanted to save her. Azalee is now riddled with guilt and becomes determined to get her time back. A flashback shows us Azalee messing around with Orphan. However, they are interrupted by Tish, who is also Azalee's cousin. Tish is very strict with the other sorcerers, and then we see Comicron, who asks Orphan and Hardia to help him with his latest invention. His android seems to have gone berserk and Comicron isn't able to stop it. Hardia tries his wind powers on it, but to no avail, so Orphan manages to maim the robot before Tish destroys it. This prompts Comicron to call him the successor of Razor's Edge, and it intrigues Azalee. Later, she takes Orphan to their old orphanage, and they revisit their old days together, where Orphan had become a part of Azalee's family right from when he was born. The duo visits a graveyard, but suddenly Azalee goes missing. Orphan chases after her, fearing the worst, and after a long search, he hears a voice that orders him to go back to the orphanage if he wants to save Azalee. Orphan rushes to the spot and fends off an attack before going to the attic. He is shocked to find Azalee's head on the floor, and then a mysterious woman appears who tells him that this is a foretelling of the future. The woman continues to taunt Orphan, but he's had enough, so he uses his powers to destroy her. The entire charade turns out to be Azalee using her white sorcery to project illusions as she wanted to test Orphan's powers. She is shocked to see that he was able to overpower her so easily, and then she goes back to him. Orphan figures out that this was another one of her pranks and also exposes her for being responsible for Comicron's robot incident. She tries to act innocent and it angers Orphan, but they settle things and go back to the tower. In present time, Orphan rides a carriage towards Staffram, where the Tower of Fangs is located. He spots Magic and Cleom, who have been hiding in his carriage as stowaways, and allows them to join him in exchange for food and money. The team reaches Fenrir's forest, which is known to be the home of dangerous beasts. They take a break, where Orphan stops Magic from pepping at Cleom with a unique kind of sound-based magic. However, he also realizes that magic has a great potential for sorcery. They continue their journey, and then Orphan tells the others about the Kimlock Church and its observers who keep an eye on the forest as they hate sorcerers. Meanwhile, a wolf dragon instructs a shrine maiden named Fienna on her next mission. Later that night, Orphan expresses frustration with Cleom and her cooking, so Magic goes to look for some food. He ends up getting lost and is attacked by a snake, but quickly activates his shield to defeat it. Now Fienna meets him and asks him to leave the forest as it's too dangerous for sorcerers like him. Magic is intrigued and questions her further, after which she mentions that she's from a village called Sacred Heart. However, the residents of this village hate sorcerers, as can be seen when their leader MacDougall appears and confronts Magic. Meanwhile, Orphan and Cleom are also attacked by the people of Sacred Heart, but Orphan manages to take them down easily. However, Magic is shot by MacDougall when he tries to make an escape with Fienna. At the village, an assassin named Xalua is informed about Orphan and Cleom, and we learn that he has also kept Vulcan and Dorton as his slaves. When they reach the village, Orphan spots the deep dragon flag and figures the residents are dragon fates who hate sorcerers. Cleom is confused, so he tells her the history of Nornir, the evil celestials, and the origin of sorcerers. After explaining the history of deep dragons, Orphan notices the wolf making an appearance and immediately identifies her as one of the deep dragons. Later, he makes his way inside the village and faces off against Salua and the others. But then, the deep dragon appears and knocks him out using her telepathic powers. Now, Fienna passes the deep dragon's message to the villagers and heals Orphan to the best of her abilities as he tries to regain his memories. He wakes up inside a prison cell and then MacDougal arrives. He wants to shoot Orphan, but Salua stops him from doing so. He's also shown to be friendly towards Fienna as he allows her to tend to magic. The two of them bond for a bit, but then MacDougal arrives to remind her that they're leaving in the morning to find the heart of the village. After a brief confrontation, Fienna stops MacDougal from shooting magic, so he leaves them alone for now. Magic tells Fienna that he wants to take her away from the village, but she says that she can't leave the forest. Then she takes him to Orphan, who is still recovering from his injuries. Later at night, Orphan notices the dwarves and tries to attack them, but then Salua appears and fights him with his glass sword after referring to him as Krylancello. Meanwhile, Cleom gets some rangers to help her invade the village, but they are too scared to do so. Now Orphan learns that Salua is the Kimlock Church's death instructor after recognizing his sword. Once again, Cleom hilariously knocks out Salua from behind, and even Fienna arrives to help them out. She asks Orphan to leave the village and talks about MacDougal wanting to become more powerful than the dragon spirits by tampering with the heart of the forest. However, Orphan refuses to let her die and comes up with a plan to stop MacDougal. And that's the end of part 1. Show some love by liking, sharing, and subscribing if you want part 2. Hit that bell icon for upload notifications as well. See you soon!